Our last story this evening is from our colleague here in Phoenix, Dianna Nanez. Dianna has been one of our coaches and one of the people who work on the Storytellers Project in Phoenix. And now she looks fabulous. Now she is a senior reporter in Phoenix. And this is a story about going home. Take it away, Dianna.
Thank you, Megan. Really appreciate that. Thank you for that story. That was beautiful. Thank you for everybody's stories. Just really put us in a place where we can share. And I was supposed to be in a beautiful place with bookshelves and fancy things, but I have like 2 cats and 4 dogs and 2 dogs, and they wouldn't agree with it. So here I am in this room that my mijo used to have, and I want to share too. I had plopped down on the sofa, our old brown sofa. I was exhausted. My husband handed me a Cuba Libra, which is just my fancy Spanish language way of saying rum and Diet Coke. And my phone rang. And I picked it up. It was my cell phone. And I looked at it, and it was one of my news directors, Kathy. And I just kind of waited. It had been a really long week. It had been election week. And I had put out this huge story on voting and people being purged from the voting rolls. And all I wanted to do was just sit there in silence for like 24 hours and not move. So I waited, and I looked at the phone, and I remember that recently one of my colleagues had told me, Nanez, if you just don't pick it up and you call back like 5 minutes later, you get credit for calling back 5 minutes later, but they've already found someone. And I was like, oh, wow, where has that been all my life? Because when the phone rings, when the email comes in, when the editor comes walking down the newsroom hall, I always answer. And I always answer because that's just me, and it's work, but also not because it's just work. Like, journalism and answering has taken me to like cover people along the border and in Mexico and President Trump and Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama and Barack Obama and just so many places. The Pope's visit, his first visit to the border in Juarez, which my Mexican Catholic grandmother had said was like the absolute pinnacle of journalism when I saw the Pope and got to cover him. As far as she was concerned, I could just go ahead and stop at that point. But I looked at the phone and I answered because that's what I do. And Kathy said, hey, I'm wondering if you've seen this fire in Northern California. It's really bad, and we're looking for some people who might be able to go. Our network across USA Today is sending different people to help. And I said, yeah, I have absolutely seen it. I've been watching it every day through the night. All my people are right there. Everybody is in Butte County, and I've been watching, scared to see if it would jump the Feather River and hit my people and my family. And she said that she had heard that too. And so she had thought that's why she would call me, and would I be willing to go? And I said, yes, absolutely, yes. So I packed my bag, booked a flight first thing in the morning, just threw in whatever I thought I needed, and then figured I could get what I needed there too, and it would all work out. I hop on the plane, and as I hop on the plane and I sit down and I'm looking out the window, I realize like this is the first time in a long time that I have been able to like just think. just think, just sit and think. And I'm looking out and I see the clouds and I'm thinking about my grandma and my grandpa and my home and my people. Because every single time that I went home to the Sacramento airport, I was going home to visit my grandma and my grandpa, my aunts, uncles, and cousins, because I'm Mexican and I have a lot of people there. And both my mom and dad's side live in this little teeny tiny Northern California town, Gridley in Butte County, and in the little tiny towns, farming towns, that are all a patchwork of families. I was thinking about my grandma, and I was thinking about how this would be the first time that I would go home and she wouldn't be there. My grandfather had passed a couple years ago, but she had just passed in February. And we moved away, and ever since we moved away, we lived in Minneapolis and Wisconsin and more than 30 years in Arizona, but we always went home to see my grandma's home and the farm town where we lived and her roses that she grew. And that was always home. Didn't matter how long I was away, didn't matter where we lived, and that this would be the first time I would go home and my grandma wasn't there. And I was always really close to my grandparents. My parents were teenagers when we had me, so we lived with them. I was so close that I actually called my grandma and grandpa ama and pa, and in Spanish, ama and pa means mom and dad. So I call my mom and dad, and my ama and pa, which means mom and dad. And I just figured, like, growing up, that everybody was lucky enough to have two sets of parents. I was so close that, when we lived with them, my ama would call me and tell me, ya vámonos, mija, ya es tiempo de dormir, ya es bien noche. And that meant it was really late. Let's go to bed, mija. Like, come on. And really late was probably more like 7:30, because my grandparents, my mama and papa, were farm workers, and they got up when it was dark and they would go work the fields. And even though I wanted to watch TV, I would still go. And I was so close that we would watch the same shows every night, even though my mama and papa would turn on Lawrence Welk, which I had absolutely zero concept for, because Lawrence Welk, and it was all this polka square dancing music, and it was all in English, and I could not understand the concept. But actually, if you listen, Lawrence Welk apparently is the exact same rhythm as banda music, which is I don't know what to tell you, but go on YouTube, check it out. You'll find out they're the same. So I had all these thoughts in my head about my ama's roses and family, and how this would be my first visit back. And that the last time I had seen her, she had actually come to Arizona. And in the more than 30 years that we lived in Arizona, she only visited one other time. And she had come in that past year, and she had said, I'm going to go. And she got on a plane all by herself. And my little 5-foot ama just never went any by herself. She didn't drive. She just was always with familia. But she came and she visited us, and I took days off work to be with her. I remember the first night, she said, ya mija, ya es bien noche, ya vamos a dormir. And again, it was 7 o'clock. And I was like, okay, ama. And I followed my little ama into the room. We laid down in bed, just like I had done when I was a little girl. And we had set up a rosary for her. She always has her rosary and her Virgens de Guadalupe. And I laid there and I closed my eyes, and I could hear her doing her rosary prayer. And I felt like I was back home. And as I had these thoughts in my head, time had passed, and I look out and we're landing. And as we're landing, and it's morning, we land, and outside it was just dark, just black. And I didn't understand like how this could be. Like, I understood that it was the fire. I understood that it was this massive fire that had been on the TV news, that it was in paradise, that it was horrible. But you can't understand something until you see it sometimes. And to get off that plane and to see the darkness in the middle of the day, and the only thing I could say is it was like a zombie movie. You saw all these people wearing these masks and to protect their breathing. And I was just kind of launched into this sense of being in a different place. And I got the car, I rented it, got on the vehicle, headed home on the same roads I've headed home so many times before. And I got on my cell phone and I called the editors and I said, I'm here, what do you need? How can I help? And they were like, you can literally go to any shelter in Butte County. There are thousands of refugees. And that's what they called our families that escaped from paradise. We don't have enough people, and you can go anywhere. And I had planned that I would make a quick stop and pick up some roses, the kind my grandmother had grown in her garden, and stop by the Gridley Cemetery and visit her and my ba and my tias and tios and primos who had died too young. But there wasn't time for that. So I remember stopping to see if I could get a mask, but they were all out. And so I just grabbed a bandana. And as I'm there, any of you who've ever lived in a small farm town or a small town will know this, but you can't go anywhere without meeting people who know your people. And as I was talking to this woman, started interviewing her, and then she asked me, who were my people. And I said my last name, Nanez, and immediately she said, oh, I know Esther Nanez and Jose Nanez. And her husband had been a principal at the local school. And she shared to me what was happening and how she had some family staying with her to give shelter to people. And when I left there, I decided that I would go to the Gridley Fairgrounds because I'd heard that there was a shelter there. And the Gridley Fairgrounds, for me growing up, like the Gridley Fairgrounds were like Disneyland. So for whatever weird, crazy reason, somebody had decided that our county fairgrounds of like our whole county of Butte, we would have the county fair in Gridley. And so it would be like the one time a year when everybody from like all the big cities, like big, like 10,000 people would come in and they would visit the Gridley Fair at the Butte County Fairgrounds. And like, this was like the biggest deal, and we would go like every night. And I always remember my grandma would be like, just bring me back a corn dog. And we'd be like, Ama, like corn dog? Because like my ama cooked everything, and she had like her tamales and her menudo and her frijoles and her huevos. But like corn dog was not one of those things. So every year she's like, and just bring me back my corn dog. And the Gridley Fairgrounds was where we would go. And I remember my cousin Betty, she would sing. She had like gorgeous voice, and I wish I had this voice. And she would sing her Selena songs, and depending on like what it was, or mariachi songs. And where my tios would like go and win things like Smurf mirrors, like because it was the 80s and they had things like Smurf mirrors. And this was the Gridley Fairgrounds, like this was it. And I drove in, and as I'm driving through, like immediately I see all of these tents and all of these cars and blankets and Red Cross and people serving food. and people wandering, just lost, and kids playing in the field. And it just looked like, I guess, what you would think an evac shelter looks like. And so I got out of my car and I walked up to this family, and I asked them if they would talk to me and share with me what had happened. And over the years as a reporter, like, I talk to people and sometimes they are excited to share their story, and I listen. But there's also a lot of times where I get the like, well, you're with the media and we don't want to talk to the media. And I understand that, and I try to explain. But this was a time where the only way I can explain it to you is there was almost no thought when someone came up and asked, would you share your story? People were still in shock, and they weren't speaking in what had happened a day ago. They were speaking as if it had just happened now. And this family had told me how they were at home and they kept wondering when they were going to get the call to evac, because supposedly they were going to do it in shifts, but then nobody was doing it. And they can see the fire growing. And so they just get in their car. They have 2 cars, their daughters, their grandkids, and they head down Skyway to escape Paradise. But as they head down there was fire on both sides of the road, this main artery out. And so they try and turn around so that they can go north. And they get stuck in this traffic jam with the fire pushing up from the forest area onto the gas station. And they look at this gas station and they are afraid they're going to die because the gas station is going to explode. And they're afraid everyone around them that's stuck in this traffic jam is going to die because this gas station is going to explode. And as they finally get out of this area, they have nowhere to go. And they're telling me, we didn't know where to go. We stopped and it was night and we just put our stuff out in the middle of the forest, just north of Paradise. And in the morning, as they're sleeping, police come and tell them, you have to get out. You have to get out now. The fire is here. And they hop in their car and they get out and they tell me about how they just kept driving. They didn't even know any road to get out. And I took their story and I told them I would share it. And I took their phone and I told them I would text them. And it was like this over and over and over again. And I got on the phone and I asked them, where do you need me to go? I asked my editors, where do you want me to go? And again, they said, you can go anywhere. There's this, there's that. There's a meeting in Chico where they're supposed to talk about emergency plan because the fire was coming towards Chico. And so I get in my car and I drive out of the Gridley Fairgrounds and I drive down the main artery of Highway 99. And as I look and it's night and how many times I've passed our Gridley Cemetery and how many times my mama would do sign of the cross for our family that's there. And that's all I could do because I couldn't stop. I had to go to this meeting. I get to this meeting and I walk in and it's at Chico State University where my dad had gone to school, and in this auditorium, and it was packed because everyone there was terrified because the story had been the Paradise people didn't get any warning. And this is why there were thousands of people missing and so many dead. And so all they wanted to know was, would there be a warning for them? And as people walked up to the mic and said, what's happening? How will I know? How can I keep my family safe? There was this man, baseball cap on, and he walked up and he was waiting. He waited in line. He walked up to the mic and he looks at the sheriff and he says, I know you're tired and I know you think you're doing enough, but you're not. We can't find our families. my grandfather is missing and I can't find him. I don't know where he is. I have called you. I have called everyone. I know you think you're doing enough. You need to do more. And when everybody was done speaking, I found this man, and he'd given an interview to some TV station. And I waited and I asked him if he would share his story. And he pulled out a picture of his grandpa and he said, "Yes, will you put my grandpa on the news?" And I told him I would do the best I could. And as we're sitting there talking, his phone rings, his cell phone. And it's someone who says, "I saw you on the TV news and I think I know where your grandpa's at. You know, you got to go to this shelter." And he puts down the phone, takes the address, just like immediately goes, and he lets me follow him. And we drive in the night to the shelter, which was actually just a church because there weren't any shelters, because gyms and churches and homes and RVs and people just parked in like Walmart parking lots were everywhere. And you go into the church and there's people on cots, people of all ages, people on the floor because there wasn't enough room. And he walks in and I'm walking behind him and I see him looking around and it's really dark, it's hard to see. And I see him making his way towards one cot. This man is sitting there and he's got this old like cap on from like VFW or something like that for his veteran status. And I hear him say, "Grandpa!" And his grandpa looks up like nothing, like, "Oh, hey, it's you." And they give this big hug. And I wrote this whole story. And I remember leaving that church that night. And I hadn't even had time to book a hotel. So I called my aunt and she said, "Yeah, just come stay with us." And she'd go. And I got in late and I stayed up all night writing the stories that I had learned that day. And in the morning, I wake up early. I head back out again, just wherever you could go anywhere. And I remember at some point, somebody texts me that this man's story, finding his grandfather, when there were thousands of people missing, somebody found someone, had ended up on the front page of the USA Today. And I thought that was beautiful. But I thought it was beautiful because all I wanted was for people to understand that my people in my home, dozens were dead. This was the deadliest fire in the United States in 100 years. Thousands of people were missing. And if people could read that story and understand what was happening, because I always felt like if this was happening in LA or New York, something, somehow there would be more people here to help. So that day I spent all day at different places in the Walmart parking lots, cars parked on the street, talking to people who needed help, needed home, needed something, were missing their people. And I remember someone had told me there was a mother who was looking for her daughter and would I call? And so I just, absolutely, I'll call. I got on the phone, I called, and she answered. And I said, "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you. I got your number. They said that you might want to talk to a reporter that your daughter's missing." And immediately, like, she could hardly speak. Her husband gets on the phone and says, "Yeah, you know, our daughter's missing." And then the mom gets back on the phone and she says, "I don't want to talk to you." And I said, "I understand." She said, "No, I don't want to talk to you, but I'm going to meet you wherever you want. And I'm going to bring a photo of my daughter. And I want you to share that photo because I need you to find my daughter." And I said, "I'll meet you." And we met in a parking lot of another church. And she pulled out the photo of her daughter. And she cried. And I took photos and tried to do my best. And it was like this day after day after day. And I would go home and my aunt and uncle would feed me And if I had a few minutes, I would play with my cousin. And then I would just sit up all night writing, try to get a couple hours of sleep, and go back out. And I remember like day 3 or 4, I asked if I could stay and keep reporting. And day 5 or 6, I asked if I could stay and keep reporting. And then day like 7 comes and they're like, we know that you need to take a break. So I agreed that I would leave home. I would leave home. And I booked a flight to leave on Sunday with the idea that I would take Saturday and Sunday off so that I could go and see some family, and that I could go to the Gridley Cemetery, which is like this, imagine like the most beautiful cemetery that you can in your mind, with oak trees and roses and every flower. And it's just been there, like, seems like forever. And everyone you love is there. That was my plan. But we got word that President Trump was going to come on Saturday, and he was going to tour the area. And so I said I wanted to help because that's what I wanted to do. And they sent reporters to be with Trump and cover his talk. And a lot of people went in that area who lived there went to see him. But I can tell you that none of the people who had been in the fire and had family in the fire and were missing people from the fire went. They were in cars trying to figure out where they were going to spend the night. They were in lines trying to see if they could get a FEMA trailer. They were just trying to figure out what they were going to do next. They didn't go. And so I didn't go. I stayed with them that day. And then I sat down when I got back and I wrote those stories. And in the morning when I woke up, this was my last day, and it was Sunday. And I decided that I would go and have menudo with my aunt and my uncle, who had taken such good care of me. And so we went to a little restaurant and we had menudo, and I had tortillas. And a lot of people eat menudo with pan, these rolls of bread. But my ama would eat it with corn tortilla, and she'd put a little bit of sal and limon, and then she'd roll it up, and then she'd dip it in the menudo. And that's how I ate my menudo, because that's how my ama ate her menudo. And every time we'd go home, we'd always have menudo, because growing up, she would make it in this huge pot so we could all come together on Sunday as a family. And so I felt really good about this, that I was there with my tia, my tío, and able to share this meal, because I knew like this would make my ama happy. And I hugged them and I said goodbye. There was only a couple hours before I needed to be on the road to catch my plane out of Sacramento. So I got in my car and I sat at the wheel, and I could go left, south to Gridley to see my ama and bring her roses, see my pa and all my family and all my people, all my gente. Or I could go right and go to Paradise. And in all the days that I'd been there, I actually never went to Paradise. All the reporters that were coming in nationally after days, everybody wanted to get to Paradise, because if you lived there, you couldn't go in. It was only emergency personnel or reporters who had their press badge. But I didn't go because I stayed with my people and trying to share their stories so they would get help. And I decided that I wanted to think about what I was going to do. But before I could even think about what I was going to do, I went north to Paradise. I had heard this story over and over on every day that I was there, that people were saying that the Paradise Cemetery had survived, that the whole town had burned, the Paradise Cemetery had survived. And I wanted to see. People were worried about their people. in the cemetery, and they wanted to know, and I wanted to see. So I'm driving down Skyway. This is the same road that I heard over and over people were trapped on, people died on the side of the road as the fire just came too close. And all along the rolling hills, like towards the river, it's just black on each side. And I could see every story that people had told me, but I could see it looking out my window. And I had put on Yahoo Maps, and I saw the gas station that the family had told me that they were worried was going to explode. And I made my right towards Paradise Cemetery, and I'm driving on this road that really becomes more forest than anything else, as houses are kind of like packed in there. And I see, as I'm about to get to the cemetery, to the left, there's a church across the street, and it's just completely burnt to the ground. And I see the arches, these like big metal arches, Paradise Cemetery. And I drive through, and as I drive in, it was like this lush, gorgeous, beautiful garden. Nothing had burnt. You could see on each side the buildings and the land were charred all the way up to the edge of the cemetery, and then it just stopped. And along the other side and every edge, it would just stop. The rest of Paradise, and the only way I can explain this, because you have to go look it up, looked like a bomb had gone off. Cars, power lines, just everything. But here was Paradise Cemetery. Perfect. The roses, the oak trees hanging over, headstones with angels, and I'm driving around, and everything just looks so peaceful. And then I see this car, and it's like in the middle of this cemetery over 4 headstones. So I get out of my car, I go look. I'm looking through the window, and I see a guitar and a blanket and a bottle of Jim Beam. And nothing else, like just like packed with things that somebody must have put in quickly to leave with, a laptop. And there's nobody there. And I'm wondering, like, what happened to this person? Because I'd heard these stories that it was so dark with smoke that people couldn't see and they would crash their cars. And then all of a sudden I hear this vehicle, and I look over, and there's a woman driving, and I flag her down. And she stops, and I ask her, who she is, and she says that she works for the mortuary, and that they were part of the crew that got to come back. And they got to come back to help identify bodies and bury bodies, because 85 people died in that fire. And we sit and we talk, and she tells me how she hopes the Paradise will come back, that the people of Paradise would come back, and that this was her first day back, and she drove straight to the cemetery because she needed to know it was okay, if it had survived. So I leave, and I'm late, like I've got to rush to the airport. And I get on the plane, and I'm sitting there thinking, and I'm sitting there resting, and I'm thinking about how I hadn't seen my grandmother. And I get home, and I get off the plane, and I immediately like sit down and try to write, because I want people to know about Paradise Cemetery. And I file my story, and I go to sleep in my own bed. And I wake up in the morning, and I log on, and I'm looking at Facebook and looking at my story. Was everything okay? Did everything get put properly in the photos that I had taken of Paradise Cemetery? And as I'm looking online, I see in these Paradise survivors and in these like missing Paradise groups that I had joined, there was a woman that had posted that she was very, very sorry. And she felt really, really bad. because she knew that people were missing and she knew that people were dead, but that her brother and her grandparents and her people were buried at Paradise Cemetery. And she'd moved away and she just wanted to know if they were okay. And I immediately log on. I immediately write back that I've seen it, Paradise Cemetery survived. And I send her the link to the story with the photos. And almost instantly, she replies, like instantly, "Thank you. I felt really bad. I know people have lost their people, but that's where my people are." And to this day, I guess 2 years, I cannot tell you that I can say that I know I did the right thing, not going to Paradise, not going to Gridley Cemetery and bringing my grandmother roses. But I can tell you that I got to tell someone the Paradise Cemetery survived and that their people were okay.